From the Times Center in New York City, City University Television, in association with the New York Times, presents a TimesTalks series with editors and writers of the New York Times. Today's presentation, a conversation with Tom Stoppard, Times interviewer Patrick Healy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Olsen-Day of the New York Times, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this exciting Times Talks. And we are so thrilled to have on our stage one of today's most esteemed playwrights, a 4-time Tony Award winner and a BAFTA and Academy Award winner. He not only entertains us with his wit and invention, but he also engages our minds and our hearts. 44 years ago, he dazzled us with the first U.S. production of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, and he's been dazzling us ever since. We are honored and delighted to have this distinguished artist as our guest, especially this week when he's getting ready for the opening on Thursday night of the Broadway revival of his remarkable play, Arcadia, at the Barrymore Theater. You'll hear much more about him and his new revival of Arcadia from our moderator. He took over the Broadway stage, The Beat, in 2008 as the Times theater reporter. He now covers all things Broadway and beyond, from the drama behind the scenes to the talent on the stage to the reality of the box office. From 2006 to 2008, he did an out-of-town run as one of our key reporters on the 2008 presidential race. Before coming to the Times in 2004, he was a reporter for the Boston Globe, where he was one of 2 finalists for the Pulitzer Prize in beat reporting in 2002. So please join me in welcoming our interviewer, Patrick Healy, and our very special guest, Tom Stoppard.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out. I'm hoping there are quite a few fellow Stoppard files in the audience. Tom, thank you so much for being here. The occasion, the immediate occasion, is this revival of Arcadia on Broadway, what I and many others consider one of your masterpieces. And I'd love to start with the idea of revivals, how you approach them, if you have requirements for them, a gut sense of when plays of yours should be revived or not, sort of how you approach the idea of reviving one of your works.
Well, to start with that point, there is a period of years which seems about right. I don't think I can put a number on that period, but I know that the notion of reviving Arcadia in London turned up maybe 5 years before we actually did it. And it just felt to me that it just, people say, well, look, it's, for heaven's sake, it's 11 years. And I'm thinking, but yeah, maybe, but that's not very long ago in my life. Finally, we did it after, I think, 16 years, 14, 15, I can't remember, 93 to whenever. The thing that one can no longer achieve, which one used to be able to achieve in the 50s, is to have a run like the Mousetrap, which lasts long enough for the people born on the opening night to go and see it. And once you can sort of do that one, there's no need for a reason for it ever to stop.
Some producers say to revive a play, there must be a particularly interesting or new concept to how the work should be done. Do you put any sort of limits or expectations like that on your play, or do you just want a good director, a good cast?
Well, I'll tell you, I think probably you're referring to, as it were, a department which isn't exactly mine. It's the look of the thing. You can deconstruct physically, and people's idea of what is, as it were, comprehensible as a version of reality has moved a lot since I started writing. As a matter of fact, David Laveau, who directed Arcadia, he did a real thing which came to New York. And perhaps it wasn't all that evident in the proscenium arch, but the original production in a theatre called the Donmar, three-sided theatre, really was a kind of deconstruction. But if you were talking about the text, then the answer is really no. I don't think of it as being something which needs to be taken apart every 15 years.
Right, and put back together. You and I have talked before about how involved you are with at least some of the major productions of your work. How involved do you get in revivals of your work in terms of casting or talking to the director about his or her concepts, and how did that work with this Arcadia?
I think the really honest answer is that if it's happening in a town where I could be completely exposed, I try to take an intelligent interest in what's going on. So,
smart man.
Yeah. So, you know, a revival in London and in New York, and indeed, this is also true of a new play being done for the first time. It's even more true of that. I would be in London, I would be at rehearsal there, and in New York I'd be in rehearsal. In this particular case, it's not actually, you know, this is a play which takes place in one room. Essentially, there's nothing in this room except a table and two chairs. The first time David and I came to New York with the play, it was a revival of Jumpers. Well, there's 100 ways to do Jumpers, even when the text doesn't change. And there's a lot more to worry about. Right. As for attending a revival of Arcadia in New York, you know, my role is quite limited. On the other hand, I'm quite, how can I put it? I'm quite merciless about performing that role. And it entails a very interesting, I hope, fruitful and pleasant relationship between me and the actor stroke character, and between me and the director, and between me and the designer. I cannot direct and don't wish to direct. I have directed a couple of times, you know, just out of a dare.
Was it a positive experience?
Well, I'll come back to that. I'm not a director. I think I'm quite good at responding to what is coming at me, especially, not especially, only if I've written the piece. I know how it's supposed to work. It's gratifying and interesting when, on not a few occasions, the piece, the event, has a better idea than you had when you were writing it. And that's to be welcomed. But a lot of the time, really, I had the best idea when I was writing it, as every writer does. Because when you're writing, it makes a certain kind of noise in your head. And if you change the music, then you better have something better in your mind to justify the change.
How, in what ways were you, did your mercilessness play out with this revival of Arcadia in terms of talking to David about?
Yes, talking to David, I'm much, much better behaved than I used to be. I always used to think when I was young that I could save time and trouble by just talking to the actors myself. Right. So my memories of my career are kind of spattered with emotional crises, entirely caused by my inability to shut up when I'm having a drink with an actor. Now I'm really very, very well behaved, and I don't give notes anymore. I just talk to David.
Is that by natural temperament, or do directors and producers? It's
No,
hard
I
to
think
muzzle.
No, it's an act of great self-discipline, because I still live under the illusion that I could actually save this production's problems, such as they are, if only they would let me actually show the actor how to say it and when. Right. No, I'm really. I've learned to be modest about that.
This production began, as you mentioned, in London in 2009 by director David Laveau, a separate cast in London, but I did a little writing on the play on that production in London, and some of the cast members talked about really just enjoying and feeling very lucky to have you in the room to be able to ask you questions. I'm sort of curious, from the American cast for this revival, do you recall what some of the questions that maybe some of the actors asked or were puzzling through, if you had a chance to talk to them, as they were getting their arms around Arcadia?
I wasn't as close to the rehearsal process as I had been the first time around. The first production, and even, I guess, in London, I can't remember. The actors, I made myself available to them, of course, for the first few days of rehearsal here, and a lot of things came up. As a matter of fact, the first couple of days can quite easily be spent in the author's monologue, which sounds like an ego trip, but actually, with this kind of play, it's really quite helpful as a foundation for the real work. And as a matter of fact, if you can answer the questions before you begin, it means that the rehearsal process doesn't keep being interrupted by questions which are, as it were, footnotes or technical questions.
Were the actors, just curious, asking that, if you can recall, different kinds of questions this time around than maybe in the original productions of Arcadia? I don't know if they were talking about the physics or the science more originally, or maybe more now than they did then?
I think, as a matter of fact, people in general, actors included, know more about that than was generally common in 1993, was it?
Yeah, 93, yeah. And this isn't, actually I changed something the other day. This has nothing to do with your question, it just feels like a good time to say this. Yeah, please.
Because, it's not entirely an American cast. We simply started again in New York and London. We thought we'd have a London, that we'd have a New York production, and we'd just go in other city. David, who directed Arcadia, is at home in both cities, and we ended up with several American and several English actors. And there are a few things in the text which the American actors wouldn't have known, and they're cultural references. Until you write a play, until you've written a play, until it's been rehearsed, you simply don't realize how many allusions a play contains to a frame of reference which is actually quite parochial. There's a British one, there's an American one.
What's an example?
Okay, so there's this little riff where one of the modern character, Billy Crudup, he's explaining that he was at a seminar where some statistician purported to show that he discovered a brand new D.H. Lawrence story, a completely new unknown story by D.H. Lawrence. And my character, this guy, says, to his inexpressible joy, one of the mathematicians at this conference was able to show that on the same statistical basis, D.H. Lawrence also wrote, at which point the text says, the Just William books, which are totally unknown here. And the awful thing is that you could spend a fortnight sleepless trying to think of anything which would work in both countries, because it's no good an English academic saying, Little Abner or something, because he wouldn't. It's got to be something that he'd say, but you would understand.
Right.
As a matter of fact, have you ever heard of the Just William books?
I have not.
You see, and you represent the sort of creme de la creme of alert cultural intelligentsia in this entire nation.
Some would disagree, but okay.
So a couple of days ago, I had this great wheeze, and it goes, now it goes, to my inexpressible joy, this mathematician was able to demonstrate on the same statistical basis that D.H. Lawrence also wrote Pinocchio. The reason Pinocchio is a great idea is that I can tell myself that this is a reference to this Italian work of literature, and the audience thinks it's Disney, which is fine.
It's excellent. Do you, Tom, think about, in terms of revivals, do you have any, have you found a desire to fix anything in the work, or do you try to resist that?
Well, fix can mean different things.
Sure.
And you probably ask for chapter and verse, and my mind will go dead. But there have been occasions where something needed fixing, and I try to fix it. Mm-hmm. But there's other kinds of things going on. I'm always slightly late to get the text down to what I would consider to be the essential. I think you can take a tiny amount out of the text, but you don't really know where it is until it's being performed. And the magic moment when it's not too soon and not too late to ask an actor to change what he's used to doing doesn't happen. It's trying to catch the light going out in the fridge. It's just, you can't quite there. And you probably do understand that actors, when an actor has got a part, got a role, learned it, every single breathing moment, every single syllable of every utterance is associated with a physical state. I say this when I'm actually doing, when my foot is there. Not all actors are bound by that from the beginning to end, but of course, the two things do get into a kind of lockstep. When I put that down there, I'm saying this. And if you take out a sentence, the brain can suffer a catastrophe. I'm making this up. I think it's true.
Right.
But I'm not an actor.
Mm-hmm. With this Arcadia coming into Broadway, were there any sizable cuts that you made, or did you keep it pure?
No, I've always trimmed this play in London, and even I tried to do a kind of trimmer version in foreign languages where the play tends to expand a bit. I saw this play last night, and I thought I should have lost that. It's like a line and a half here, 3/4 of a line there. I thought, damn. It's to do with beats, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the line. It contains information. It contains it in a completely respectable word order and syntax. It's just that I'm not a musician of any kind. I cannot remember a tune. I'm so not a musician. But I think it's like music. You want to get from there to there, and if there's 3 extra beats, you feel it's not at its most elegant as an animal which combines utterance and physicality.
That's fascinating, because so much in so many of the key scenes in your different works, there are often characters either coming out of time and playing with each other. Act 2 of Arcadia, for instance, the scenes where the characters from 1809 and the present are all on stage and they're sort of mixing, and some of the most beautiful moments are moments where you can see an intellectual discovery, say, happening in 1809, and it resonating in some very specific way on stage in the modern characters. And the musicality of that is, to me, such a treat. Having you here, one of the reasons it's special just for me as a writer is to hear how you as a writer talk and think about your own work. I'm sure many in our audience have either seen Arcadia or familiar with it, but I'd love to just hear, I was writing up a little bit of a description of the play, but really I'd love to hear how you what Arcadia is about to you, how you would describe it as a play?
What it's about?
What's about, yeah.
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is that the play is not, in fact, the consequence and end product of my sense of a decision to write a play about X. So it's not about X in that sense. It turns out to be about something, but that's different from setting out to write a play about something. Arcadia turns out to be somewhat about, among perhaps other things, but it's about the difficulty of finding out what happened. This is a question which is quite interesting to pose in this building, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And it's always assumed that whatever did happen, it has only one, as it were, interpretation. You know, there's a little set of facts, and that's what happened. And one perhaps thinks that simply identifying those facts will completely deliver the answer to the question.
Right.
Well, you've been in places reporting where you know that it's not actually that straightforward. So a lot of this play is about what history means. Look, I did not, I promise you, at any moment sit there thinking, oh, great, I'm writing something about what history means. That's wonderful.
Right.
Because this is a perfectly legitimate area to talk about, you and I, together, why not? It's not actually a lot to do with the process, to be honest, because theatre is a storytelling art form of a very particular nature. I personally think that the art of theatre, not just for writers but for actors too, is to control the flow of information that goes from here to there. You can think of, not that I do, but you can think of a play as being a kind of little waterfall which just laps over that edge. It's just, all this stuff is just lapping over that edge. And this information is what you're responsible for delivering. So when you're working, when you're just at work, you're thinking about that more than anything. You're thinking, am I now telling the audience something which they've already picked up 3 pages ago, or have I actually got this right and it's going to detonate at that moment? And it's complicated because the moment differs among different people in the audience. So it's a lot to do, I think it's a lot to do. I mean, the most satisfying thing in a play is not a kind of great laugh, pleasant as it is to hear. The most difficult and the most satisfying and the most potent sound that an audience can make for you is a kind of sigh. And it's the sigh of comprehension and a sort of a sigh of identification. And that's what you value in a way, that you're telling the story, but the audience has to do some work, and that's what the sigh is about.
It's interesting. You talk so much like a journalist, which I know you were long ago, early on in your career. When I was covering, I was the paper's Hillary Clinton reporter, and those 17 months, so much of that time was spent trying to find out what happened and realizing when the paper asked me to write a story about Bill and Hillary's marriage in the years since they left the White House, realizing during that reporting experience, A, it was impossible to write, but B, how there were so many versions of what the reality might be, talking to their friends or even their relatives, that there was sort of an impossibility to the task. And there were moments where it sort of bordered, you saw where absurdity came into it, trying to say, yes, this is the one truth, and I'm going to build a story as if that's the only story to tell. One of the wonderful things about Arcadia is how their ideas of truth keep being upended sort of constantly. What they thought was correct in, say, present day, you're found in 1809 to be, in a lot of ways, in a very fun way, much more cavalier, or it's more about sex and just pure sex than it is about any sort of, intellectual standoff.
Be that as it may, how were things with Bill and Hillary? Anyway, sorry, that was just cheap.
No, I doomed myself there. Did you, with Arcadia, did you write, as we talked about the shifts in time, I'm just very curious, your writing process with Arcadia, did you, if you recall, write it in a fairly linear fashion? Did you find you were sitting in the past for long stretches and then sitting in the present? And just love to know.
I'll tell you, when I was writing that, I really arrived at a conclusion that I shouldn't worry about not knowing too much about what was down the pipe at all. And this isn't a fresh minted confession, I'm afraid, but it might be partly new as well. But I've said it before a couple of times. For those who know the play, I'll keep this brief because there are so many who don't, but there's a moment where the modern academic arrives at the house, in the room, where we've seen certain things take place and certain documents have emerged from there. And I remember, actually, he's called Bernard. I remember, enter Bernard. There he is. I write in longhand, so it wasn't a keyboard. Enter Bernard. And at that moment, I had to decide whether these documents were in the house or in his briefcase. I didn't actually know. And when the play is finished and all that, and you're watching it, that seems almost impossible, some kind of weird self-delusion that I'm now having. But it's not. I remember having to decide that. It didn't take long to realize that I was better off if he was bringing the stuff to the house. But what I mean is, yes, linear in the sense that page 17 was written after page 16, but not in the sense that I kept jumping to the modern period and then taking care of the 19th century in a separate linear process. On the contrary, it's great fun if you get a certain way down this play. When you're writing it, it's tremendous fun realizing that you are in a position to set up the things that you need to contradict or to confirm. So I'm saying this badly, but there's a kind of game-playing thing, how these two things interlock, and somebody. It's just fun actually, because you think, oh, I know what I can do. I can make him say, look, I'm certain of X as sure as so-and-so did Y. And we've already seen the scene where so-and-so never did do Y. So it's really fun to write.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Do you, in terms of this might be an argument, foolish argument for messiness, but when you say, I might be better off if he has the documents here rather than here, do you ever force yourself to make choices as a writer where you wouldn't be better off just to see what might come of it, or is that self-indulgent folly? Do you know what do you see what
You
I'm
mean
asking?
just follow a less obvious path?
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's even possible as a hypothesis, because it's not that you're choosing between two paths in a fork in the road and each one might be equally promising. No, I don't think so. Only one of them is possible. It's just that you might choose the wrong one.
Right.
And I think that in the example I gave, if I'd chosen the other one, I would have got nowhere with the play.
Right. You left school in the 50s before university and worked as a journalist, and I believe including some work as a drama critic.
Second string. Yeah.
What was?
Well, no, wait a minute. Finally, I got to be on a magazine in London, sort of arts magazine, where I was actually the critic, but I was no use as a critic.
Why?
Because I misunderstood what criticism was completely. I always assumed that every play which I went to see, new play, that it had already been given a score by God or the Jungian consciousness or whatever. And that my job was to figure out what that score was. I was far too kind of timid to realize that the job consisted of reporting on your reactions, whatever they may be. And then, I knew people in the theatre a little bit, actors and so on, because I began by reporting theatre rather than reviewing it, which is really what you're doing, isn't it? And I don't know, Kenneth Tynan, you know who I'm talking about, of course, he claimed to be incorruptible and probably proved it, because I'm sure that, well, he did prove it actually, because he said the most terrible things about people, but maintained the relationship. People just had to eat it. And even Laurence Olivier, Tynan would say appalling things about Olivier's wife, Vivian Leigh, at the time, playing Caesar and Cleopatra. But in the end, well, anyway, I think he was possibly unique, and all I'm saying is that I couldn't possibly have managed to steer a course of integrity.
You wrote about theater critics in Real Inspector Hound, a play from the 60s where the critics Moon and Birdboot are watching a kind of loopy murder mystery a la Agatha Christie and then become involved in the action. And it's a short one act, but over the years it has been referred to as sort of a touchstone for some theater critics, and dramatic literature scholars have thought about the ideas in this play about the limits of reality, of free will. And I'm just wondering, for sort of to get to the bottom of Stoppard, people sit and sort of ascribe these thoughts and these very elaborately constructed sort of intellectual ideas. But I'm just wondering if you're also just having sort of a grand time writing a play as well. You're having fun.
Mostly.
Yeah.
I mean, Real Inspector Hound is a farcical comedy.
Yeah.
And actually, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead doesn't work unless it's really treated as some form of comedy. I've seen productions which, in a sense, were trying to pay me the compliment of treating them as complex, deep works, which were making philosophical points, which is, great, but then why would you write a play to do that?
That's the thing, in these, I just sometimes feels what gets lost, and maybe got lost in that long question I just asked, is what a wonderful sort of juicy storyteller you are. People get caught up in the meditations and the ideas, what they see as, but you're really, the storytelling is so key to the center of it. And I wonder if do you feel like sometimes people miss that, or they get overly caught up in?
Well, all I know is that at the moment, it's what's stopping me writing a play. The conviction that I have to find a story. I've got topics, areas of interest, really interesting stuff, actually. And I'm just kind of boggled by it because none of it means anything until there are individuals with a trajectory and a psychological and emotional existence which conflicts, etc. And I don't mind if it's tearful or hilarious, but I've got, yeah, I mean, it sounds strange, I suppose, but you know, I tried to write a play last summer, and I just couldn't. And I kept thinking, so how did I actually get into the last play I wrote was called Rock and Roll? How did I start Rock and Roll? Where did I come from? And I had no memory of starting writing it. I couldn't remember what my thoughts were. And so I've always completely and utterly understood certain things Harold Pinter has said in the past about his own writing. And they sound gnomic, and they sound, I don't know, somehow barely credible. But, you know, I mean, Harold would kind of think, he'd have some sort of vision or something of somebody just saying, where's the scissors? And then he'd have to figure out who said that and to whom. And he'd kind of, I mean, so I'm not giving anything away, he's written and talked about this, and he kind of gets little bits forward, and at a certain point somebody says, I don't know what he says exactly, look in the drawer, son, for example. So he thinks, oh, I get it, so he's the father, you know. And it sounds incredibly pretentious, and maybe writers shouldn't talk about that, because it does seem strangely, you know, as it were, bolstering up one's own mystery and the mystery of art and so forth. Ooh, remind me to tell you about the porter in my hotel and asking me in the lift in a minute. But the truth is that stories don't fall in your lap, you know. As far as I know, they don't. You just have to kind of edge into them and try to find them, really. See, I'm doing the same thing, pretension.
Well, when the play didn't come to you this summer, do you just shrug and move on?
No, I was really miserable, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you?
Well, I was offered. I was asked to adapt a classic novel for a film, and it was an attractive. It was an attractive job.
Can you tell us what it was?
I'm not sure, really. It's a job. It's regardless of, it's not actually that interesting. I mean, it's an interesting novel, but it's the word job which is more interesting. It's not, you see, I don't think, when I'm writing a play, that's not a job. Writing a play is life. Being asked to adapt a novel for a film director is a job. Now, I don't mean that to be, as it were, in any sense condescending or denigratory, but it's a different part of your head is engaged. This would not be true of an original film script, just to make sure that I'm clear about this.
Sure, yeah. I brought up The Real Inspector Hound, and I'm sure many, again, in our audience could bring up their own favorite work, but I get to be moderator. So I was in Real Inspector Hound. I was in the play my sophomore year in high school. I know, we're talking about that.
No.
And then Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are
You were
dead.
in it,
I was
were
in
you?
Rosencrantz my senior year of high school,
Right.
and it was basically the end of my acting career. But it was a great way to go out. I, then tried playwriting, and that was, so then journalism came around. But I remember in high school being told that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead sort of had its roots in a play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Meet King Lear.
Yes, there was no such play, but when I was trying to find, when I was first started writing Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I hadn't worked out what I was doing, and I was trying to write about them only in England, when they leave the action of Hamlet and land in England. And I was writing from that point on. And in some whimsical way, at some point I must have thought, well, the king might as well be Lear and see where that gets us. Arriving on the cliffs of Dover with this Gloucester up there.
That's great. But people ascribed a play to you with the title and it didn't actually exist?
The what?
There was no play, The Rosencrantz and
No.
Guildenstern meet King Lear. Got it.
No, but a friend of mine, his friend rather, well, a friend of mine was involved in a vampire movie, not exactly based on my play, but sort of based on my play. And it's got this great title, which says a great deal about the brilliant people who made it. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, the Undead. Very nice.
They live on.
Yeah.
What did Shakespeare, how did Shakespeare and specifically Hamlet sort of loom for you as you were sort of coming up?
I'm not very promisingly at school.
Mm-hmm.
After I left school, then, you know, sort of classic thing about the text and the event. The text, I couldn't find a way in, and I wasn't even trying very hard. Mm-hmm. It's when the text becomes the event that you understand what theatre is supposed to be. And I was in a big regional city, or you know, a decent city which had 2 or 3 theatres, professional theatres, and so I began to see Shakespeare plays, and then I understood what Shakespeare was.
Was there, I'm sure you've addressed this many times before, but this is me being selfish. What was it about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that interested you as 2 characters?
Whatever it was absolutely instant. You know, people, very sweetly, they're constantly giving playwrights ideas for their plays. I mean, anybody who writes plays has this nice thing happen to them. It's never any good, naturally.
Right.
Well, because they only know the plays you've already written, whereas you're trying to write one you haven't written. But my friend, who was also my agent at the time in the early 60s, for some reason, we'd been to see a Hamlet, and he said, you ought to write a play about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. I'm not quite sure exactly what he said, but from that moment on, there was absolutely no question in my mind. It was like a second, a moment. And it appealed to me completely. I didn't know what it was going to be, and I got it all wrong, and I was writing about them in England and all that. But finally, when I realized that it was actually about what they were doing between the scenes of Hamlet, I really enjoyed writing it.
Yeah. There are, there are characters, there are stories and plot lines that so dominate your work, but I'm just sort of curious, what do you enjoy puzzling through the most in terms of ideas or emotions? Are there ones that you feel like
while working, you mean?
Yes, yeah, that have given you the greatest satisfaction?
Oh, that's all wrong, I'm afraid, in my case.
Okay.
It's about, it's a terrible trite kind of truism thing, love of words, love of language, but I'm afraid that is me. And puzzling things out, no, that's not where I'm really engaged. I just love finding what would like to be the precise words in the precise order which convey the precise thought in just, as it were, at its most elegant minimum. And that is why I think I just have a generalized vague depression about my plays in translation, because I'm completely fixated on the weight of a word and the components of a word, and my stuff is full of things which are chosen for sound, you know. Did you just mention it after Marguerite or something just
Which
now?
one?
Well, actually, I met an actor who was an understudy in Inspector Hound and After Marguerite, which was here 58 years ago.
Okay.
No, I'm just sorry, I'm free associating now, but I remember that there's, just as an example of what I'm trying to say, is that if you write a phrase, the following phrase, if you write this into a play, the intrepid Uniped, there's no point in translating it. He might as well have two legs. It doesn't really matter because that's not, you know, the reason for his being one-legged is not actually emotional, psychological, historical. It's just to make a music.
Are you sentimental about your plays at all?
I'm not quite sure what the question means, actually.
I think it would, to flesh it out, it would be, I know oftentimes writers say, you know, all my plays are my children, I love my children equally, but I suppose it's backing into a question of, are there plays of yours that sit especially in your heart or in your mind?
No, it's, I'm a bit callous about them and a bit ungrateful. None of them seem to be, you know, I mean, none of them seem to be quite what I wanted them to be. Close sometimes, but on the whole, I get very shifty about being, as it were, praised, because I seem to be receiving praise about something which I haven't yet written. That's how it seems to be.
Well, I'm going to take a leap and ask you which ones came close, which ones have come close? Which plays of yours do you feel like?
You know, for different reasons, one gets fond of things, of plays. And I'm fond of Arcadia and, for example, The Real Inspector Hound, because things fell out in a lucky way. There's actually that little comedy starts with a corpse, a body on the stage, and I had no idea who this person was or who had killed him or why. And this was very early on in my life, 1968. But I sort of sussed out even then that it was okay, just cross your fingers and keep going. And it turned out that he was the perfect person I needed to be dead on the stage. But that was like, you know, weeks and weeks later when I got there. So that's a sort of reason for being fond of a play when it turns out to have been, when it was a lucky kind of play. I don't know, I like the invention of love because I just had a fantastically interesting, pleasurable time gearing up to write it. It's about a Latin scholar, and I'm not one, and a poet, the same, you know, A. Houseman was both. And it's in a period, late 19th century into early 20th century, where I love the language and the cadences. I enjoy writing the stuff. So that was that's a play which I really liked for those reasons.
With Coast of Utopia, I imagine there are others here who spend a good deal of the 06-07 season like me at Lincoln Center, seeing all three parts and thinking about and talking about the three parts of Coast of Utopia. I though, we have you know, here as a writer to talk about your plays, and I'm really curious with Coast of Utopia, such a massive work in terms of life and politics and philosophy and ideas and love and 19th century Russia. When you undertake such an enormous play, enormous in so many different ways, I wonder, how does Tom Stoppard judge what is success? Whether that play, for example, and I guess I'm using Coast of Utopia as an example, this sort of very large undertaking, whether to you it has succeeded, whether you even think in those terms of whether this play is a, and by success I don't mean in terms of prizes or critic. I think you understand what I'm asking.
I think success is telling, as I said, it's a storytelling art form, and success is keeping the children, as it were, of all ages, rapt. You seldom manage that, but it can be done. Because theatre is the form it is, and particularly, one might say, on Broadway, even more than in the West End, the gift wrapping opportunities are considerable. In other words, Coast of Utopia, designed by Bob Crowley and Jack O'Brien's direction. Sure. It was sort of beautiful thing to see. Just beautiful. I take no credit for it at all. It was just beautiful, and the actors, Brian, Ethan, Billy, and all of them. There were 30 of them. They did such good work. I'm sort of rambling, but what I'm trying to say is that isn't that actually what success ought to be? It's people trying to do their best or nearly their best work ever tonight, now. That's success. And the same, looking at it from the writer's point of view, the same text has a way of delivering both kinds of response. It doesn't guarantee anything, a text. Otherwise, you'd never see a duff production of a Shakespeare play. You'd never see a lousy Twelfth Night, and you have seen some, or Hamlet, or anything else. So the text, evidently, is not exactly a guarantee of anything. Theatre is much more demanding of its practitioners. And it's a very odd thing to be a writer, because when you're writing, or in my case, everything is self-sufficient. You might as well be writing a sonnet. It's just you and it, and that's it. Nobody else is involved, and you don't want anybody involved. And then it has to become theatre. And you find it's not self-sufficient. You find that getting anybody to just walk up there and say it is not sufficient.
I think you're right in so many ways about the gift wrapping of Broadway, and I wonder how you have felt over the course of your career, how, and I didn't mean to sort of ascribe thoughts to you that may not have occurred, but I'm just sort of curious how welcoming you find Broadway to be, whether you feel like that applies any constraints, commercial Broadway, commercial theater, to your work, or if you don't think in terms of such constraints and expectations of commercial.
I don't think in those terms, but on the other hand, you can't be oblivious to them. It is different here. There seems to be more at stake, not just financially, but for the lives of everybody involved. There's just a lot of, it's slightly worrying. There seems to be a lot at stake for everybody each time. And probably in most places in America outside New York, you don't feel that quite so acutely, which may mean that everything resolves into money. It's welcome to capitalism as well as welcome to some of the greatest, the greatest dance music acting, design. It's kind of the best.
Well, I wonder, though, how much of that is because we take ourselves so seriously. If we set these sort of false expectations that this must be the best Arcadia, let's say, that we could possibly do, but by best, it has less to do with how we feel about the work, we as maybe the actors, the director, the producers, and more, how does Ben Brantley feel about it, or how do we feel that last row in the balcony, with tickets. Part of me sort of is curious, you can only really answer from the playwright's point of view, whether you necessarily care about those things, like how are you selling? I mean, there's some playwrights who are half your age who become obsessed with what the, weekly wraps are, how the ticket sales are, and I don't know, does that disturb you, or is that, maybe that's just human nature, I don't know.
Does it disturb you that other playwrights care deeply about this? Or
Yeah,
what?
I didn't ask that question well. No, the sort of the preoccupations with these things, with things like money, with...
Look, the thing is, this is not happening in the abstract. You're working with your friends here, and I'm talking about, producers, not just your director, fellow. It's, you become this kind of league of friendship. And, what kind of a oath would be there saying, oh, as long as my immortal words are delivered clearly, I don't really mind whether, you lose your shirt or... No, I mean, it's not like that, is it? You're all in something together. I personally, but don't take it personally, against all the evidence, I don't like talking about myself. You might think, well, but why, in that case, why does he never stop? But the moral obligation not to be disobliging is extremely strong. So, you're all in this adventure together. And I would really love to be, I don't know, somebody like Samuel Beckett or something, who's, you never ever, he never popped up on a talk show that I know about. But it's too late now. I was sort of...
You're here, brother.
I can't, yeah.
Tom, what sort of theater do you like to see nowadays? Do you go much to the theater?
There isn't a sort of.
Okay.
In fact, that question goes against my beliefs in a sense. I do believe completely in things being good, rotten, mediocre,
excellent,
brilliant. Well, I mean, I believe that there is actually a scale of quality. The categorization of, do you like farce or dance or tragedy or mime, that's irrelevant. I only believe that things have quality.
What have you seen recently that you've liked?
Nothing at all. That's just a joke.
Right. Anything in New York, though, that's really stuck in your memory for good or ill that you've?
I don't think you quite grasp what a playwright has to do when he's in New York with a play of his own in previews.
All this free time.
But I'm going to see a couple of plays. I've seen nothing. Oh, that's not true. When the last time I was here, I enjoyed Three Sisters, and also I went to see a friend of mine, Ethan Hawke, in a play he was doing. I think that's 2. Did I see a third one? I don't think so. I shall see a couple more plays before I leave New York, which are not Arcadia, thank goodness, because it's a very nice play, but you really don't want to watch it 15 times.
I'm afraid that's it. Please help me thank Tom Stoppard.
Thanks very much.